Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Let's ComBinate. I'm your host, Subhi Saadeh, and today we are honored by Jeff Gensler, who is a veteran quality and regulatory executive with over 30 years of experience and leadership in MedTech, Pharma, and combination products quality. Most recently, he served as the Vice President of Quality at Kendeva Drug Delivery, and he just founded the Quality 4.0 Consortium. Welcome on, Jeff.
Thank you, Subhi.
Yeah, so one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past is kind of this idea of jumping in the fire. And there really isn't any more kind of fire than a warning letter or a consent decree. And you've been part of a number of them. What is it like to be checking your email or whatever, having your breakfast, and then it's just like, oh, we got the longest warning letter in history.
Yeah, it was interesting times. When I came into Zimmer was under a warning letter. We were going through remediation. And, I think that was just about done when Zimmer bought Zimmer Biomet. And then when Zimmer bought Zimmer Biomet, FDA quickly showed up there and performed an audit. And I think right away we knew we were in trouble, probably within the first couple of days of that inspection.
So when a company is that large, um, a lot of times the inspections can take weeks. What made you think, like in the first couple of days, like, oh man, our hands are going to be full after this one?
Yeah, I think there were signs FDA was finding stuff, and it was really the first time we had seen some of the stuff as well. The four auditors that came in as part of that inspection, we had worked with in the past at Zimmer. So we really could judge where they were at, what they were thinking. And, I think they were surprised by some of the things. But, about halfway through that inspection, then we realized we were going to have to start taking a more aggressive approach. We were putting things on hold. Everything, I think we put all the inventory on hold during that inspection. And then we also shut down the operations until we could get through some of the clearing items. And I think at that time, we also then started up a remediation process. We had the playbook for remediation from the Zimmer side, and then we just began implementing that same playbook at that same time. We set up a 13 work stream remediation group. We brought in 13 directors from Validant, and then we kicked off that remediation during the FDA inspection.
Sorry, in the middle of the inspection?
Yep, and we kicked that off in middle of the
So one time I was in an inspection, right? And it became abundantly clear that there was going to be an observation related to one item. And the item was considered a medium level or major level finding. It was an observation, but fixing it was going to be relatively low effort. And so I was able to, in the closing meeting, demonstrate that we had already initiated some of that work. The initiation piece won't take that long. And then the execution would take a couple weeks to a month to get something finally updated and implemented. 13 work streams and hiring people. I mean, that sounds insane.
Yeah,
In the middle
but
of,
it was crazy. Yeah. So, I think the
but
big
I
piece
guess
is,
before
yeah,
you move on, like,
yeah.
what was how did you guys decide to do that? Like, was it considered a flary sort of, all right, we need to try and put as much of the toothpaste back in the tube before like things get crazy? Or walk me through the decision to like start the because, okay, sorry, this is like a
Yeah.
soliloquy of a question, but
Yeah.
one of the first things that you need to do when you're going in trying to remediate is root cause analysis, figuring out where are you going to put your chips, so to speak, as far as fixing things. Like, I'm assuming you guys thought through, well, if we present to them a 13 work stream remediation plan when we haven't done any root cause, like, they may push back on like, all right, guys, we get the dog and pony show, but you guys don't even
Yeah.
know what your issue is because we just found it for you.
But, I think keep in mind that, Zimmer had been remediating the quality issues or similar quality issues for the last
Oh,
probably 5 or
similar.
6 years. So a lot of the things that we did were take the procedures that were developed under the Zimmer remediation and then move them over to the Biomet operations, right? So it was almost cut and paste. I mean, the response that we put in was 16,000 pages. And the way that you get to 16,000 pages is you have a bunch of procedures that already exist and you implement those procedures and then provide those as part of that response. So, really it was kind of copying the quality system and moving it over, copying the process. And that really provided the foundation for us to be able to move quickly and set up that remediation in that manner. And typical, it's one off. And, ultimately in those situations, you want to get it corrected and verified. So that's the ideal situation. That doesn't happen too often. But at this stage, it was all about containment. So, that was really the big focus for us, why it didn't get pushed to a different level, because we did take the right containment actions. We did take the right actions with how we're going to correct and control, right? So I think that really provided the baseline of not taking it to something more serious at that point in time.
So Zimmer Biomet, I'm not sure what DePuy's, history is, but there is
Yeah.
like a concentration of those kinds of companies in the Warsaw, Indiana area, like the epicenter
Mm-hmm.
of orthopedics, you could say,
Yeah.
medical device side. There are certain product types that I think just have attracted regulatory action. Like I've worked in infusion pumps in my history. So
Mm-hmm.
like was some of the, because you mentioned like we dealt with similar issues and we were able to more or less leverage the historical remediation to satisfy, the new issues that you saw? Was it like everybody in orthopedics was getting warning letters because it's a product type situation?
Yeah.
There used to be like this, it wasn't even a saying, maybe allegory that like you can't work in infusion pumps if you haven't gotten a warning letter or something like that.
Yeah.
Orthopedics?
I don't think it's the same. Warsaw is the orthopedic capital of the world. So there's a lot, it's a centralized group there. But I think it started with the Pew, J&J first, and then it went to Zimmer. And I think it was really enforced that way, and I think with the big players. And they also knew they had a lot of links then to subcontractors and people providing services. So, I think they really focused on the big players, and I think J&J, Zimmer, and then Zimmer Biomet. But that said, I think orthopedics is a little different, right? It's almost, if you walk into an orthopedic manufacturing facility, it's not your typical medical device manufacturing facility where they're making tubes and sets and bags and things like that. But it's more, I would say, heavy industrial machining. And I think, when you look at implants that get machined out of metal and things, it's very common with the approach you need to take, including cleaning and making sure they're clean before being implemented. The same with, I'd say packaging and sterilization. And you think about what is the biggest risk of an implant, orthopedic implant, one of the biggest risks is around sterilization, not being sterile, and infection. So, those were the big areas that really Zimmer had done a lot of work in those core areas. And they were the same core areas that they were finding at Biomet. So because of that, we had the processes set up. We knew the systems. We knew the equipment that we needed to bring in. We knew how we had to do it. And, some of that started even during the inspection. So we had come in, be in the inspection 8-9 hours in the day. And we had spent 3 or 4 hours in a room talking about what we're going to do to contain, how we're going to, it was some long days. And really that provided the foundation then of, hey, okay, let's kick off the remediation. Let's get this going. We had the foundation of how we run remediation. We brought in a project manager, and then we kicked off our weekly meetings. $300 million and 1,500 contractors. And they came into Warsaw and were there for the next 2 years remediating the quality system. We had 1,400 DHFs, design history files. And we actually had to rent a J.C. Penney's building to put our DHF remediation work in that J.C. Penney's building in Warsaw. It was interesting times. A lot of great work was done in a short period of time. And, as you say, being thrown into the fire, it was a great period of learning because of that.
You said it was 4 inspectors. How many days?
They were probably there. I think they were there probably 4 weeks.
The 21 CFR Part 4 came out and became effective in 2013. And one of the first warning letters that kind of shook the industry was the Amgen warning letter. And then not far after that, the next one was the Meridian Pfizer one, with the EpiPen, which you were involved in.
Yeah.
And what was that one like?
Yeah. So, when I was at Zimmer, I was looking for the next opportunity, what was next. And I really wanted to get to a more critical device. really wanted to look at maybe the next FDA work. I was contacted by Pfizer at the time about Meridian. They were looking for someone that had medical device experience, had FDA experience. I came down and saw the process and the product. The life-saving product was very interesting to me. A combination product, very interesting to me. I didn't have a lot of experience with pharma, so I think that was interesting. So I decided to move into the Meridian work and take a job with Meridian Pfizer to start working on that warning letter.
And so it was after the warning letter that you were brought in?
Yeah, I came in June of 2019. And when I came in, FDA had just left. So they had just left. Day one, I was working on writing a response to the 483 that was issued. From that point, we had 15 calls with FDA, and those were on design, what they felt were potential design issues. We responded to those, and then they went to our supplier, our plastic supplier, did an audit, and then brought the 483s from the plastic supplier back to us with an audit team. And they were there. I think it was a 3-person audit team, CDRH audit team focused on the device side.
This was after the initial inspection.
Yep. So this would have been a December audit, December 2019. It was focused, and they closed that inspection on December 22nd at 2:30 in the morning. So left us a 43, and we worked through the holiday to respond to that 43. At that time,
It was
back
what,
to
15?
15-day response.
Yeah, working through the Christmas holiday, New Year's.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. It was like
do they give you any kind of leeway during that time, or it's just like 15 days is 15 days?
That's 15 business days.
Yeah.
Typically, you want to try to meet that. Depending on the case, you can ask for an extension. I would say they're pretty liberal with granting extensions in that case. One thing you never want to do is miss that day and not communicate. Right. We did. I think our response went in on January 15th, but it was working every day over the holiday for sure, to get that done.
Now, from a combination product point of view, I remember looking at the warning letter and being like, okay, well, there are some design considerations here that make sense and should have been considered. Something like, user needs not having consideration for injecting through clothes, and just, like when it comes to an emergency use product, some things should be considered. Hindsight is 2020 when you see something like that and you're like, yeah, you should have considered that. But what were the big meat and potatoes findings, and how did they shift how you thought about combination product quality?
Yeah, so I think when you look back at the original warning letter, that was issued in 2017, and that was right after the combination guidance came out. And then with that, they issued 2 post-market reports, PMRs, and those PMRs, one was on reliability and one was on complaints. And the warning letter, if you look at the warning letter, it was mainly around complaints as well. So really, I think it's a difference between the way pharmaceutical companies handle complaints and the way device companies handle complaints. It was kind of the focus of that warning letter. But bigger than that was the PMR around reliability. So, at that time, they really didn't have an idea what they wanted from reliability. They knew that they wanted reliability as a design output. There was a lot of negotiations even before I got there to get to a place with an agreement that became the 5 nines requirement. And that later became a guidance document for industry in 2022 that was released around the 5 nines requirements for emergency use, auto injectors, and reliability. So, that warning letter and the work that needed to be done was around those elements.
What was like negotiations typically end up with, like you agreeing to sometimes meet in the middle? Like there's the getting to yes kind of thing where everybody communicates their interests, and you just find where everybody's interests align. But when it comes to numbers in particular, there's a, like, I have my number, you have your number, like, all right. But how did you get to the 99.999 nines? Like, what was that negotiation like? Because that ended up becoming, next to EDDOs, and like there were a few topics that just ended up like taking combination products by storm, the 5 nines being one of them.
Yeah, I wasn't involved with that, but you can imagine how it went with, Pfizer and FDA negotiating. But, I think as I see it now, I think there was a group in the FDA that really knew where they wanted to get to, that had the reliability experience, industry reliability, and reliability expertise that really drove to that 5 9 number. And I think it made sense. At the time, I think it was hard to understand and hard to swallow, especially from a company that might not have had that experience. Reliability has been around for years in things like electronics and things like that, right? So, it hasn't been part of pharmaceutical or part of device, and for sure not part of pharmaceutical.
So when it came to remediating that warning letter, how was the approach different than the Zimmer one, Zimmer
Yeah,
Biomet one?
yeah. So I think even back up a little bit after we sent our 43 response in, we got a letter from FDA, and it was Janet Woodcock. So we went to Washington and met with Janet Woodcock about the remediation, the work that needed to be done. And then at that time, they were thinking that that device was going to have to be redesigned. The attention that this warning letter had was above any that I'd ever seen in history. And I think that was a signal to me of the seriousness of what we were dealing with and the visibility that this had. She also had drug shortage. And, this is a product that, would get a lot of attention if it went on shortage. It was emergency use. And if it wasn't available for patients, it risked their lives. So that was really important too. So it was always about balancing that risk as well. So I think that's what made it different from what I went through at Zimmer was the visibility at FDA, the drug shortage element, and the criticality of the device. So I came in right away with a plan of the playbook that we had designed at Zimmer. Even some of the contractors that I worked with at Zimmer, we were able to bring over as well to really hit the ground running. So we started with a plan. We kicked off our work streams. I think there were 6 work streams. We had an independent project manager. And, on the heels of that meeting at FDA, we had the plan approved by Pfizer and began remediating the quality system. There was no issues with that affected the safety or anything like that. So really it was improving the systems, improving the processes, bringing the device thought process into some of the design of processes. How do we develop processes? How do we implement SPC? How do we implement sampling? We brought in an electronic system for DHF wind chill. We implemented that, which was required because when you start tying fault tree analysis to risk management to DHF, that's hard to do. So the electronic systems are really worth their weight in gold in that case.
You mentioned the playbook a couple times. So,
Yeah.
when you get a warning letter, you said that there was an approach, right? That you did the first time that Zimmer took the first time, and that you were able to leverage it with the Zimmer Biomet thing, and then you were able to kind of look back at it when you were going into the Meridian Pfizer situation. What is the high level plan? What does the high level framework look like in a playbook like that?
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing you need to focus on is containment, right? Patient safety. Is there any risk in the market? So one of the things you do is we always would treat it similar to what FDA would require from a consent decree. We'd bring in a third party and have them review of our processes, review of our batch records, do the final releases on our batch records, and put those systems in place, do a baseline audit. A lot of that stuff had already been done before I got there at Meridian. So I was able then to build off that infrastructure. They had brought Parexel in. Parexel was doing the batch record reviews. Parexel had done a baseline audit. The audit findings were being worked on. So we stood up a very strong CAPA process similar to the device side and really started to drive it all through CAPA. And that's what we did.
Mhm. The independent bodies, because I have heard that is a requirement when it comes to consent decree, right? You need to bring in an
Mhm.
independent third body and they're responsible for certain work. What specifically, like, what do they do in that kind of
Yeah.
situation? Like, you bring them in and they're doing release activity?
Yeah. So they'll do release activity. They'll do your batch record reviews and releases. They won't actually physically release them, but there'll be a requirement before the release, and they'll have to sign off on those as part of release. So that's a big part of it. But then the baseline audit too, bringing that third party that has respected FDA experience to do the baseline audit, I think is really important as well when you kick off remediation like that. So I really see the third parties as those 2 major elements. The other one is strategy and driving strategy and how. And I think it's important to make sure that you have that strategy and are building that strategy in from day one.
And then do they report to FDA as well separately from you all, or they would report through your reports?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure on that, Subi. I mean, my expectation was that they would be there if FDA asked them. When you put together your responses to you know, and you want to make sure that you're building that into your response, and that's a requirement that you're building in
Yeah.
and communicating to FDA that they are there.
Has some of these situations changed your approach to inspection readiness? I feel like when it comes to, people always say on product development teams that the next time this gets opened will be in an FDA inspection or something like that. Obviously, that
Yeah,
mindset is really important, but a lot of times the inspection readiness I've been part of is like everybody pulls all the documents and tries to review all the documents when they feel
yeah,
like there's an impending inspection. Sometimes I feel like that's maybe a good exercise, but sometimes I feel like it makes you overly anxious. Like you feel like you're over preparing, and then you end up reviewing 100 documents that may or may not end up being in an inspection anyways.
yeah,
Because it's, inspections, they're not like checklist audits where every quality system element needs to be reviewed in the same level of detail
yeah.
using a canned checklist.
Yeah, I think it's an element, right? I think when FDA comes back, they're gonna go back through your former or your previous observations. So having a very good process on previous observations is important, right? I think having storyboards on your critical issues that you've had since the last inspection is a good practice that comes through an audit readiness. But I think it's a good practice in general, and I think we should have those storyboards as part of our CAPA process. So it has changed the way I've looked at it. It's really done more about trying to build it into our processes and build it into CAPA of where these observations are being run through and including verification of effectiveness, which should, so if you have a solid CAPA process, CAPA system, inspection readiness should not be as important, as it is when you don't have that.
One of maybe the and my experience is limited and subjective just like everybody else's, but one thing that I find interesting about the way that pharma looks at kappa versus device is like device just has kappa, right? Whereas the drug side tends to have a bunch of, say, kappa
Yeah.
deviations and lab investigations and commitments from a regulatory inspection, audit. All of those things could eventually feed into a kappa. um, the interesting part, though, is when you're dealing with FDA or a regulatory observation and how you flow that through a root cause analysis process.
Yeah.
And so you're saying from your point of view, like with the Meridian situation, like you did capital C kappa, where
CAPA,
like you're doing it similar to the medical device, not the
right.
pharma way.
So we're brought in the systemic CAPAs, and that's really what it ends up being between device and pharma. The medical device CAPAs are more systemic CAPAs that are for bigger issues, trends, significant issues, whereas CAPA in pharma is more of like a CAPA action, or more of a one-off. So I think combining those two has been interesting and has been a big challenge, and I think will be a big challenge for us in the combination device spaces. We almost need someone to translate between the two, between device and pharma during these inspections. If we fast forward to where we're at today, after our meeting with Jana Woodcock, we had a couple more meetings with her, and we actually completed our remediation, I think, in 2022. FDA didn't come back until 2024. At that time, they actually brought 8 inspectors back, Subi. So there were 4 from device and 4 from Cedar. And that
Huh.
was a really focused inspection, real intense. They were very senior inspectors, and they were calling back the FDA every night. It really brought more credence to the focus that this warning letter had within FDA. It was really significant.
Yeah, I haven't heard of a 50-50 split like that. Like I have heard of, a team from Cedar being tailgated, to use like a bad joke, by like one CDRH person or vice versa. I haven't heard of a 50-50 split. Like in your experience, that's not common, right?
I haven't been through a lot of the inspections, the combination device inspections, but yeah, they have 50-50. And actually, there was a lead on both sides, a lead for Cedar and a lead for CDRH.
Really? Oh, that's
So,
interesting. Yeah,
yeah.
I did an episode a little while back with Lori Auerbach, and we talked about the FDA inspection guide for combination products 7536 point whatever. So check out that episode if you're interested in
Yeah.
that. Very cool stuff. So
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about like you moving eventually into Kendeva. There was like maybe walk me through because the
Yeah.
you know sometimes I was part of Baxter selling off the bioscience group, and then it became like Baxalta, Shire, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, until and so it went through a number of spin-offs and acquisitions, et cetera,
So,
et cetera.
yeah.
I don't know what the full story was with Meridian, Myelin, Kindeva, et cetera. Maybe walk me
Yeah.
through that and your experience on the combination product side.
Yeah. So, I think it was in 2021, we were divested from Pfizer to a company, Alteris Capital. Alteris Capital is a healthcare private equity company that focuses on healthcare companies, but they also focus, which was a good thing for us, on growth, right? So, when they came in, they really realized that, the EpiPen. So right away, the CEO of the company wanted to build a new
Wait, why?
facility
Oh, because of generics?
because of some of the design issues and not meeting 5.9s. Because at that time in 2021, we didn't get to
Mm.
meet 5.9s until 2024. So we were continually working on that design to get that to 5.9 compliant design, which we did in 2024. So there were concerns about that. Building a new facility was really important, and how to extend our business was really important. So there was a focus on building out a new facility with sterile injectables, and there's going to be Annex 1 compliant, isolator technology. So that was really kicked off in 2022. And then in 2022, we were combined with Kendeva. Kendeva was a spinoff of 3M. It was the meter dose inhaler company within 3M. And then that's how Meridian became Kendeva in 2022. So, which really kind of takes me to where I'm at now in my career is that, really what we did during that, that facility build out was really drive industry 4.0 and quality 4.0 into that facility. That facility was later recognized by ISPE as being a finalist in Facility of the Year, which is a huge honor for a small facility like that. But what it really kind of drove to me and back to our previous discussions on the warning letter is how do we as quality really get more into the preventive and preventing defects and preventing nonconformances rather than focus on QC and inspecting quality. And so in that facility, we're able to build out a paper-free manufacturing process, EBR, electronic logbooks, and then we also had electronic lab notebooks and a LEM system is electronic end-to-end. We were implementing AI in the process to be able to implement things like continuous monitoring of processes, which is really, really important. Start predicting when things might go out of spec rather than waiting till they do go out of spec. And then we implemented a new technology around process development called frame by frame, which I also went out and was speaking at PDA conferences and ISPE conferences on, which is really great new technology that's coming through. So, I really became passionate, and I am passionate about driving quality, but I think we're at a point in quality that digital transformation is coming. And how do we as quality leaders leverage that digital transformation to really move quality to the forefront and drive to a preventive process rather than a reactive, corrective process?
For a state-of-the-art facility like that one where you were describing, was it batch-based manufacturing planned or was it continuous?
Yeah, it was batch based.
Was
I think there's a goal eventually to get to continuous, but that still would take the right product and the right volumes on the right machines. But, I think the advancement with isolator technology has been great, especially around aseptic in the pharmaceutical manufacturing space is really one of the biggest risks that we have in our industry. And, taking people out of that process is really the next step of what we need.
with the digital transformation, you mentioned a few things, electronic notebooks, electronic batch records. You also mentioned like the DHF thing when it came to the dealing with the Meridian warning letter. What do you think is like the most important quality system element to try and digitize? Is it EBRs?
Yeah, I think when we look at digital transformation and digitizing, it's like, where is the most critical data? And I think from my perspective, from a quality perspective, that is process data. And most of that is being entered into our paper batch records and being sent off to our storage facilities every day. if we can capture that data and trend that data, it really can change the way we look at our processes and understand our processes. There's a new capability through AI called Golden Batch, where you're able to look across your process end to end to understand what truly is the driving features within your process. And if you can control those driving features, then you can make sure and improve the possibility of producing a good batch every single time and a highly capable batch every time. So I think it's driving also, and we did it through Meridian around process capability. And we got to change the way we look at processes and not look at processes as good or bad, but capability-based processes, and driving our processes to the highest level of capability, then we'll really improve the process and improve the output, reduce investigations, reduce nonconformances, and really is the huge business driver. And I think digital transformation is at the core, and AI now is at the core of improving process capability and understanding our processes better.
Mm. You're kicking off Quality 4.0 via a consortium. What are you trying to accomplish with the consortium, and where does quality need to go in the future?
Yeah, with the consortium, as we work through the exercise that we did at Condeva around setting up the new facility, I really recognize those critical aspects. So, as we move forward into the digital transformation space and AI and ML, I believe that it's going to be more about how do we link processes to software to people. So with the quality consortium, what I'm bringing together are the digital solutions with the services, and then linking in the customers to really provide digital solutions for customers. I think, as we look at it today, I think big pharma is spending millions and billions of dollars on AI today. I think that small to mid-sized companies are struggling of how do we really use that? And I think we can provide through the consortium proven solutions that are validated, ready to go off the shelf, that can get you moving in that right direction. I still think we're years behind in some of our technical capabilities, including batch records. I think if I look across the industry, the small portion of industry is in electronic batch records, and that's going to be a cornerstone for digital transformation and quality going forward. So how do we move that forward? And then how do we then also use the data we have today to drive improvement?
Maybe talk about what you mean when you say electronic batch records, because I think people may hear, well, I review scanned PDFs of a batch record.
Yeah, no, electronic batch record is more real time and eliminates paper from the process 100%. The things that you gain from that are more profound than just what they're calling paper on glass. For me, it's more about the controls you get. By implementing, you can build batch records that will tell you if you're in spec or out of spec as soon as that reading is taken from the machine. So now you have it taken from the machine, not being entered by an operator, not having documentation from an operator. So you interface there. Things like calibration, right? Electronic batch records will keep you from using the wrong gauge. If it's out of calibration, it'll be a hard stop for that. Things like training. If operators aren't trained on a process, it's a hard stop on that. Those are the things that you can embed into electronic batch records to really control your process and predict your outcomes. A 30 to 40% reduction in investigations just by eliminating documentation errors alone. The improvements you get for a review of a batch record, rather than having hours and hours of manual review of a paper batch record, hundreds of thousands of items, you can do it real time and review by exception. So you can do it instead of days, it's hours or minutes. So
Where can people find you, Jeff?
you can find me on LinkedIn. Otherwise, send me an email at jeffgensler4@hotmail.com.
Awesome.
All
This
right.
was
Thanks, Subhi.